That said, I do want to read the most important parts. And the most important part, of course, is the portion written by Clarence Thomas, the great and powerful Clarence Thomas. But there was a little bit here from Justice Barrett, who was in the concurrence. Both Thomas and Barrett were in the concurrence. They're part of the majority opinion, ruling that there is no constitutional right to surgically mutilate minor children, sad minors, I should say, in the politically correct manner. So this is the portion of the decision that is, I've got to move stuff around a little bit here. Make sure this is all working. This is the portion of the decision that is by, let me get my red pen, by Justice Barrett, with whom Thomas joins. Thomas wrote his own rather lengthy concurrence, and I'm going to read the entirety of the Justice Thomas concurrence. I'm just going to touch on a couple portions of Justice Barrett, because Barrett wanted to address a specific issue, and she doesn't phrase it this way, but the specific issue is really, does this transgender thing that would, the plaintiff's claim would warrant surgically mutilating sad minors, does this transgender thing even really exist? And I'm not speaking for Justice Barrett here. I'm just paraphrasing in my own words, but or is this whole transgender thing just a social infection of unmarried women of a certain age raising children who are just hysterically, neurotically psychotic and are willing to put their children under the knife, under the scalpel, to satisfy their own deranged view of their child's gender? Are we just allowing these women to monstrously mutilate their own children for their own emotional self-satisfaction? Or is this transgender thing just a real thing that has never been recognized in all of human history until the last 5 years or so? And suddenly it just appears. Now, of course, Justice Barrett doesn't put it quite in those words. She addresses it somewhat differently. One is whether or not this is a class that could be recognized legally in any real sense. So the Sixth Circuit, and they're upholding a lower court decision in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Sixth Circuit, she notes, had held that transgender individuals do not constitute a legal class for the purpose of recognizing some constitutional right. And it was right to not recognize transgender as a legal class for some constitutional right. To begin with, she writes, transgender status is not marked by the same sort of obvious, immutable, or distinguishing characteristics as race or sex. It's not defined by a trait that is definitively ascertainable at the moment of birth. So, of course, race and sex have been deemed by the Supreme Court to be special protected classes for purposes of discrimination and other reasons. The plaintiffs here began to experience, these would be the transgender minors, the sad minors. They began to experience gender dysphoria at varying ages. I would suggest whatever age it occurred to their mom to have a transgender child. They began to experience gender dysphoria at varying ages, some from a young age, others not until the onset of puberty. Folks, I saw an interview of a woman yesterday in response to this decision where she says that her child began expressing the opposite of her biological gender at the age of 1.5. 1.5. Folks, I have 4 children. I've raised all of them. I know what a child is like at 1.5 years old. The notion that a child at 1.5 is expressing a belief that their genuine gender is the opposite of the biological gender they were born with is psychotic. And these are the people we're allowing to make decisions about whether children will be surgically mutilated for the rest of their lives. It's grotesque. Meanwhile, the plaintiffs, who are actually adults purporting to advocate for these sad minors, the plaintiffs acknowledge that some transgender individuals actually detransition later in life. Oh, so they were mistaken about their sadness. In other words, they begin to identify again with the gender that corresponds to their biological sex. Accordingly, transgender status does not turn into an immutable, unchangeable characteristic, because there are immutable characteristics. I mean, until 5 years ago, we all thought that someone's sex was immutable. I mean, now, of course, it is immutable unless you subject them to grotesque surgical deformation or chemical deformation. But some things are immutable. A person's race is immutable. If someone's as handsome as your host on this Andrew Branca show is, that's immutable. Nothing can be done about that. Sorry, fellas, the competition is stiff out here. But this sadness, this gender dysphoria is an emotion, folks. It's an emotion. It's like happiness and sadness. It's an emotion that passes. And I would note that the actual genders, males and females, tend to deal with and manage emotions differently, don't we? Men, whether they're conditioned to do this or not, or it's inherent to being a male, having that XY chromosome, tend to, not everyone, but tend to recognize emotions as passing and focus on getting whatever the job that needs to be done gets done. Men don't get to sit down and cry on the oil rig because they're sad about that. They're not going to get any more Twilight novels. It's over. They don't get to do that. They have to get the job done. Women, on the other hand, appear to be evolutionarily optimized to be more sensitive and give more substance to emotions, which makes sense because through virtually all of human history, women were caring for children, and children are emotionally undeveloped and uncontrolled. So you need to be hypersensitive to emotional states if you're raising the next generation. But many women seem to treat emotion as if it were a physical object, like a book. It's not, folks. Emotions are passing states. And you don't surgically mutilate someone permanently, render them sterile and asexual for the rest of their lives from an age of single digits because of a passing emotion. The very concept of doing that is insane. What if a child was just crying because they were sad they lost their blankie? Would you cut out their eyes? It's crazy. Well, Barrett notes, nor is the transgender population a discrete group as our Supreme Court cases require. Instead, like classes we have declined to recognize as suspect, the category of transgender individuals is large, diverse, and amorphous. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Anybody want to guess if this organization gets USAID funding? Anybody want to guess whether organizations like this, these hysterically neurotic, psychotic, child-maiming organizations can exist in a world without a USAID, laundering American taxpayer money to these horrific purposes? The World Professional Association for Transgender Health states that transgender can describe a huge variety of gender identities and expressions. Folks, when something is everything, it is nothing. It is nothing. I swear to God, one of the greatest travesties that progressive Marxism has inflicted upon Western society generally and America in particular is their corruption of our scientific institutions. The same scientific experts who have sold us the global warming demise of the earth for my entire lifetime. The world's been about to die within 5 to 10 years. The ice caps are going to melt. The polar bears are going to die. We're all going to cook. The water levels are going to rise. Manhattan will be underwater. All within the next 5 or 10 years. But it's always 5 or 10 years in the future. We never get there, of course, because these things never happen. The same people selling us, brainwashing, terrorizing our children, every generation after generation, to be terrified of existence itself, because the very earth is going to kill us. Catastrophic, anthropogenic, global warming, global climate change. This is a terroristic narrative. The same scientific experts who sold us paper masks for a respiratory virus that passes through a paper mask effortlessly, that sold us 6-foot spacing because you can't get infected with a respiratory virus if you're 6 feet away from someone, who told us that when we're sitting at a restaurant table, it's okay to take the mask off and eat, but when you stand up to go to the restroom, the mask has to go back on, because that 3 feet of elevation change, that's what drives the infectious state of those virions. The same people who sold us, mandated that we take an experimental vaccine that admittedly does not prevent infection with the virus it's targeted against. The same people who collapsed the world economy all over a respiratory virus that had 1/100th the mortality rate of seasonal flu. These are the same scientific experts who are telling us we ought to recognize as a society a constitutional right for hysterically neurotic, psychotic mothers to surgically mutilate their children, their minor children. Where are the metaphorical torches and pitchforks? The American Psychological Association, one of these very groups I'm talking about, similarly uses the phrase transgender youth as an umbrella term to describe varied groups with many diverse gender experiences. They can't define it because it doesn't exist. It has to be everything. And therefore, of course, it's nothing. A set without bounds is the universe. Underscoring the point plaintiffs' counsel acknowledged at oral argument, that there are people who fall within a transgender identity who might not fit into a binary identity. In other words, there can be scores, hundreds of gender identities. There are no boundaries of the group. The boundaries of the group, in other words, are not defined by an easily ascertainable characteristic that is fixed and consistent across the group. This is all a way of saying this group does not actually exist. If a group is not definable, it does not exist. Any set that cannot be defined is not a set. That's a characteristic of a set, that it has bounding characteristics. Absolute madness. Thanks for watching this highlight segment of our full-length Law of Self-Defense live stream. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to give us a like and subscribe for more expert analysis on politics, law, and how to be hard to convict. And to watch the full-length episode of this show, just click right here. Stay safe.